This is iDesign Lab, a podcast where creativity and curiosity meet style and design. Curator of interiors, furnishings, and lifestyles. Hosted by Tiffany Woolley, an interior designer and a style enthusiast, along with her serial entrepreneur husband, Scott. iDesign Lab is your ultimate design podcast, where we explore the rich and vibrant world of design and its constant evolution in style and trends. iDesign Lab provides industry insight, discussing the latest trends, styles, and everything in between to better help you style your life through advice from trendsetters, designers, influencers, innovators, fabricators, and manufacturers, as well as personal stories that inspire, motivate, and excite. And join us on this elevated, informative, and lively journey into the world of all things design. Today on the iDesign Lab podcast, we're joined by Peter Boyer, one of the most performed American orchestral composers of his generation. With over 800 performances worldwide, Peter is a master at designing musical experiences that blend cinematic storytelling with symphonic power. From Ellis Island to the coronation of King Charles III, his work continues to inspire audiences around the globe.
Welcome to the iDesign Lab podcast. Today we are going to have a very exciting conversation with Peter Boyer, who has designed a life around music, more importantly, the orchestra.
Yes, the symphony and classical music. And I have to say, before we start this podcast, I've had, throughout my career, the fortune to work with a lot of great names, talented people, extremely talented artists, from McCartney to Springsteen to Joel to Bono to Pavarotti. The names and lists go on and on. But what I want to say today is the gentleman who's with us, Peter Boyer. For me, he ranks on right up at the top of the list with those names. Wow. I have always been so impressed with his work, love what he does, and it's just a fascinating aspect of music that I think is just wonderful, that I think more people should enjoy and get out and listen and hear. It's just what you do, composing and conducting big symphonies. I always call it the big sound of music. I love it.
The big sound of music.
And I've had the fortune to know you for, 25 years or so, and have followed your career. And I always enjoy seeing your posts and the places that you're performing at. One of the things that's one of my goals this year is I want to take Tiffany and my kids to come see you in one of your performances that you do. And there's so many of them that you have done, which we want to dive into and jump into.
I will be happy to provide you a list of some good opportunities to do that. That would be lovely.
Yeah. So first question we really want to ask is, how did you get into being a composer? How did that start?
Well, my personal story goes back essentially to high school time. So I'm not anything like a child prodigy. I didn't start music when I was extremely young. I didn't start composing when I was extremely young. But when I was in high school, a couple of things happened that, looking back, set me on the path that led to where I presently am. So when I was 15 years old, I decided that I wanted to play the piano. And I was really a Billy Joel wannabe. That was 1985. I'm still a Billy Joel wannabe.
I know, right?
In some key ways. But so in 1985, when I was 15 years old, I asked my grandmother, my father's mother, who really doted on me as the oldest grandchild, boldly asked if I could have a piano and piano lessons. And my grandmother complied happily, and a few days later, a moving van showed up with a new
amazing
upright piano, which was my first piano. I was 15 years old, and I took to that very quickly. And at that point, there was really no meaningful connection with classical music. It was pop music, Billy Joel in particular, and Elton John, and Dan Fogelberg, and Journey more on the rock end, etc. All of that. And so I took to it very quickly and started, I realized that I had ability to start writing what were then basically songs, or very simple instrumental compositions, early on. Right off the bat, and really was immersed in that many hours a day. But a very important thing happened in this high school time. So I was in Smithfield, Rhode Island. That's where I grew up.
On the East Coast.
East Coast and the Northeast. And So I was at Smithfield High School and was one of a very small group of students who had an opportunity to take a music history course with a great teacher, Robert Cleesby, who was my high school choral director and the first person who really exposed me to a lot of classical repertoire. So in the course of that year of studying this music, going chronologically, starting from the Middle Ages and heading up toward the present, halfway through that year, two things happened that coalesced and really set me off on a path. One was that my grandmother died. She had set me up with all of this when I was 15. So at this point, I was just turning 17. So it had been about 2 years worth of lessons and pop songs and beginning to accompany the choir and all of that. And at the same time, we came to Mozart. We came to Mozart in the course of this music history class. And this was shortly after the great movie Amadeus had been released.
Yep.
And although now I understand how fictionalized that portrayal of Mozart was, when I was a teenager, of course I didn't. I just took it at face value that this was Mozart and this was his story. I didn't realize that this was a Hollywoodized version. But I was completely fascinated by this. And of course, Mozart's last unfinished work was a Requiem, and this is dramatized in the movie Amadeus. He didn't finish it. He died himself while writing it. That's a long story in and of itself. But my grandmother died. I saw the movie Amadeus. I learned about Mozart, and I said, I want to write a Requiem Mass in honor of my grandmother who just died. And I was just turning 17 years old. And in fact, I did this, and that's a long story, but the end of the story is that 3 years later, when I was just turning 20, and I was a junior at Rhode Island College, which is where I did my undergraduate work. I had skipped my senior year of high school and went to college a year early. And 3 years later, just at the age of turning 20, I conducted about 300 performers in the premiere of my Requiem Mass. So that was 4 vocal soloists and a huge choir and a big orchestra. And I'd never done any of this before. And I was very fortunate to receive a lot of mentorship and help financially and morally and emotionally from a group of people who believed in this very ambitious young fellow. And so there was so much attention given to this premiere. I got myself into USA Today newspaper, which is another interesting story. So I had national coverage of this. The local television stations and local radio station and local newspapers all wrote about it. So on the day that it happened, which was a Sunday afternoon in March of 1990, the place was literally sold out with standing room only. Over 1,000 people came to see the premiere of my Requiem at age 20 with 300 people on the stage. So this was both a musical experience, but also an experience in terms of being a kind of entrepreneur and learning
leadership,
what required leadership to gather all of this together, to get adults, I was a young adult, to invest in this, resources, in kind and money to make all this happen. And so it was a huge success and a very important and very obviously heady young moment for a young composer at age 20 to do this. And so at that point, I guess you could say I had become a young composer, although it's important to note that I hadn't had any formal composition lessons at that point. I did have mentorship, a man named Stephen Martorella, who was very important in my undergrad experience. He was and is a pianist and organist and harpsichord player, and somebody who had great interest in me as a young man and gave me a lot of resources. But he wasn't a composer, so I didn't actually have any formal composition lessons. In fact, for another year and a half until I went to graduate school at the Hart School of Music at the University of Hartford. So I did this enormous project plus another couple big projects in the next year, my senior year, all basically with a lot of self-motivation. And then many things came after that. But that was kind of a very unusual way to start a life as a classical composer.
So that was a pivotal aspect of your life, that happening. And you basically at that point, I'm guessing
on your way,
but at that point I'm guessing that piano was the instrument that you were playing, but from what I'm understanding, you also wrote for the entire symphony for many other instruments. Is that correct?
That's correct. And and that of course is a big part of what classical composers or orchestral composers do. And essentially you could divide the work into the big category of composition and orchestration. And these things, of course, are very much related. But I learned initially the craft of orchestration simply by studying scores. I went to the Providence Public Library and took out scores of Requiem. So I took out the score of the Mozart Requiem and the score of the Verdi Requiem, etc., and listened to recordings.
Score really quickly, though.
So just the printed music,
Okay.
the sheet music of the entire piece. And so, if you think of piano music with simply
Right.
2 lines of music for left and right hand, when you're
Yep.
looking at a full orchestral score or orchestra and chorus, then maybe you've got 30 or 35 lines of music on the page, indicating what every instrument is doing. And
So
so,
ev- so
Truly
every
is like
instrument-
reading Chinese.
Yeah, so every instrument is
Really?
listed on
that's
that
correct.
page?
That's correct. Or for those who don't know, orchestral scores are organized by instrument families. So you have your woodwind instruments,
Yep.
Flute, oboe, clarinet,
Right,
bassoon, in a
right.
family on the top, and you have your brass instruments, horns and trumpets and trombones and tuba, in a family below that, and then you have your percussion instruments, timpani and snare drum and bass drum, etc. And then you have harp and keyboard if that's there. If there's a chorus, then the chorus is there: sopranos, altos, tenor, basses, and then finally the strings, really the great body of the
I
orchestra:
love
violins,
the
violas,
strings.
cello, bass. So indeed, as a teenager, as I began to look at this, it's like opening a world and hearing inside another composer's mind of the notes that they put down perhaps hundreds of years ago that still speak to us today
Resonate.
through this
Yes.
miraculous thing of music notation.
Music.
And I was totally fascinated by this, and I'm still fascinated by it. And this is what I spend, much of my time doing, is trying to create the same kind of thing in a contemporary guise.
But you're starting all that with the piano, correct? With
That's
the
correct.
keyboard?
That's correct. And it's important to say, I'm often asked this. The only instrument that I play is piano, is
Piano.
keyboard. Now we're in a time in which we have sample libraries, so that I have at my disposal all of those sounds that I just mentioned: the woodwinds, the brass, the percussion, keyboard, harp, strings, choir. All of this I can call up through a very cool computer system that I have,
Right.
and pre-recorded single individual notes. But when I wrote all of this early music, I had only a piano sound. So it's really being able to understand, if I write these notes for a violin, what's that going to sound like when a violin section plays that? And that kind of thing is really what orchestral composition is about. It's wonderful to have the tools that we have now, but I didn't have them when I was a teenager or for my early pieces. I just wrote it at the piano and then began to understand, and I really couldn't hear it until I stood in front of an orchestra for the first time. And of course, as a young person, when you're doing that, it's an unbelievable learning experience, because every single second that you're hearing what you wrote, you're getting this incredible human feedback, and you're understanding, this is what happens when I write this down.
Right.
Now, of course, I'm quite accustomed to this. I can hear it in my head. But when I was a teenager, it was a bigger leap of the imagination to do this.
And I guess there's a lot of imagination in kind of, you're playing it on the piano, but then kind of thinking, in your head what this sounds like. And like you just said, today you can take those notes, put them into a system or program, and it's going to play out the violin or whatever it is.
It really
So-
is designing music.
So back in the 90s when you started this,
That's right.
that's a lot of visualization in the head, hoping that
It
it's going to
really is.
sound.
It's funny because even as you're explaining that to us, we have 3 daughters who are very into music right now.
Well, they
and
have
it's
a band.
big part of our life.
Yeah.
And they just started in high school, and their focus was, one of them is the guitar, one plays piano, one plays drum. But the daughter who was doing guitar, they put her in guitar. She was all excited. She shows up for her first day of school, and it's classical guitar.
Yeah.
And she's totally thrown for a loop. She totally, was like, I don't know if that's for me. I don't know if I should pursue this. I don't know if I should stay with this. We called our music instructor, who we trust so much, and he was like, no, stick with it. It's it really is the basis of what music,
Yeah.
it's the beginning.
He came
stages.
over the house and had a conversation with her. He said, you classical guitar, you need to learn. You need to almost master that.
You're building a foundation for
yeah.
further understanding and for further technical development, for sure, absolutely. And also, at that age, our minds are so open and so fertile at that time, and it's just like a great time to learn language as well. So I think during those teenage years, exposing oneself to all of these kinds of musical early experiences can really pay rewards down the road. They certainly did for me, and I
Absolutely.
think they do for many.
Without a doubt.
And a lot of it seems to have been lost in the schools. The schools don't, like when I went to high school and to junior high.
No, it was not involved at all in my
when I did,
generation.
music was a big thing. Today, it's almost non-existent.
It's very very unfortunate because I'm not a sort of professional advocate for music education, but I certainly know that study after study has shown that the study of music increases ability intellectually and emotionally in many other ways.
Across
Absolutely.
the board.
So
and
obviously, as a composer, I would tend to say that having music in schools is incredibly important throughout the whole experience, from earliest up through high school and through college, et cetera. So it's a very important part of our learning.
Yeah. So you're 21, 22 years old. You've composed and you've done these one or two amazing events. How do you move forward, or how did you move forward into where it became a career? Was there a point? Well, let me ask you a question. Before you did that, did you have visions of some other career that you were thinking of?
So, in my very youngest days, I actually thought, before music came into my life and really overtook my life, when I was very young, I actually thought maybe I would be a comic book writer and illustrator.
Okay.
So I have to say, when I was
creative in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, your mind was creative.
Right. I never imagined myself in housing construction or something. So comic books, and illustration, all of that, I thought maybe that would be the way to go. And I did that up until music took over. When I was 15, then that I just immersed myself in it so strongly that I stopped drawing, alas, and my work was putting notes down on a page. And of course, at that point, I was literally physically putting the notes on a page with a calligraphy pen at the very beginning.
Okay.
The Requiem Mass, which I wrote by hand over many, many months when I was basically 18, 19 years old. I still, of course, have the original manuscript.
Such a tribute to your grandmother.
Yeah. So, that was really done with a calligraphy pen to do the note heads, and then the stems and the flags of the notes, and then using a smaller pen to actually write in all the text. But so starting shortly after that, in the early 1990s, music notation software, which allows us as composers, as musicians, to input the music notation via a keyboard, a MIDI keyboard or an electronic keyboard, and then to type in text, etc. That, of course, it was in its early stages in the early 90s. But I actually started in 1990 was the first time I began to use that kind of software. And so now, years later, I basically never actually write on paper anymore, even though there's something very tactile and wonderful about it, because it's so much easier to simply play the notes in to music notation software. I use a software called Sibelius, which is wonderful. And it allows me to then, as we mentioned earlier, to send the musical lines to whatever instruments I need to hear, and to edit as necessary, to take a sketch and to expand. So the software has come a long, long way since the early 90s. And of course, so have computers themselves.
So do you believe that formal training was the catalyst, or was it the passion that got you to this career?
So it certainly was both of those things. And to answer Scott's earlier question, after having done the Requiem and also a couple other big projects that I won't get into because that was only my junior year. My junior year of college was the Requiem, and I did more in my senior year. But I knew that I wanted to go on to graduate school. I knew that my learning process was still early,
just beginning.
There was a lot to learn. So to sort of very quickly go through the next steps, I went to graduate school at the Hart School of Music at the University of Hartford for 2 more years after graduate school. So I did a master's degree and a doctoral degree, what's called a DMA, a Doctor of Musical Arts. Wow. So I actually had received my doctoral degree by the time I was 25. So I was kind of young fellow to have a DMA. And that was in Hartford. And then I also studied privately with a very, very renowned classical composer named John Corigliano. He accepted me as a private student, and I studied with him for 1 summer in New York, and then moved to Los Angeles. So I've been there since I was 25 years old. and did one more year after having done my doctorate of studying film and TV music in a program at USC, now called the USC Thornton School of Music. So by the time I was 26, I had a doctorate. I had done this one more year of film and TV focused study, which was really a much more commercial focus versus classical. And those things have informed, the path that I've taken. I was approached about a teaching position and took that teaching position at the Claremont Graduate University, at the Claremont Colleges, but really started a lot of hustling to get my music out into the world, and began to approach orchestras and conductors with my music. And also at that time, when one is in one's 20s, there are competitions that one can enter.
Right.
And I did enter some competitions, and I did win those competitions. So there's something in particular called the BMI, used to be called the BMI Student Composer Award. Now it's just called the BMI Composer Award. And it's a very competitive program that has many hundreds of entries per year and picks a handful of winners. And so I won that a couple of times when I was in my young 20s. And that was the first sort of national exposure to the classical community. But of course, you've got to hustle and get your music out there. And I still, even to this day, I'm still promoting my music on a regular basis. But I'm happy to say that now many more orchestras and conductors are simply coming to me, which is a great thing that I wish had happened, in my mid-20s. But it was a long time of building this up. And in the early period, if I could get even one or two or three orchestral performances, I mean, it was a huge deal. It was a thrill. And now, happily, I'm at a point where things have really exploded in the last couple of years, as Scott had alluded to earlier. And in last calendar year, 2024, amazingly, there were 134 performances of my music in one
amazing.
Calendar year. So things have really grown. That means basically every 3 days.
What do you attribute to that growth? I mean, is that just the internet, social media?
Well, I think it's also a lot of what he's composed is just
your catalog is so vast.
Yeah, all of those things are factors. I mean, I think more than anything else, it's been a continuous and relentless work ethic over these years, doing broadly two things, one of which is to compose what is now a relatively large body of music. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not like Mozart, it's not like Bach or Telemann, with hundreds and hundreds of compositions. But I mean, have a catalog of about 30 works. And some of those works, in particular, Ellis Island, The Dream of America, have become very well known and have been, on national television, on PBS, performed many, many times by many orchestras. But also other works of mine, have had many performances. And I'm constantly writing new music because there are commissions, and I'm in a very fortunate place to have had a series of commissions over the years that has been pretty continuous. So the catalog continues to grow, and I continue to promote it, but also there's a kind of blossoming effect. For example, when I first started and was promoting my music to orchestras, of course, I would send my music to the most famous conductors and almost never get any reply. But I got replies from younger conductors who were earlier on. They were climbing the ladder, so to speak, and they took an interest in my music. Well, now years have gone by; those younger conductors have risen within the field. And so they now have music directorships, et cetera. So there's a kind of ripple in the pond effect that has grown out over the years. And it's been a long process. But yeah, I mean, to have 134 performances in a single year is such a wonderful thing. Yes. And to just be able to, I think I'm not the type to ever just sit back and say, okay, I'm done. I don't think I could do that. But to know that this body of music is growing and that the interest in the music is growing on a regular basis is very gratifying, of course.
But besides writing, you're also conducting, correct?
Yes.
So you're actually going to live performances around the planet.
So
literally,
it's interesting that and my training was both as a composer and a conductor, although more as a composer for sure. And so I do a relatively modest amount of conducting compared to composing. But what tends to happen is if I'm invited to do something as a conductor, it's usually because my music is involved. So there have been occasions where I'm asked to conduct, for example, Ellis Island, The Dream of America, because the orchestra doesn't have a music director. They're doing a search and they want to do the piece. And so I brought on to do that, et cetera. And my music is kind of falls in a mainstream, if you will, American symphonic composition. So my
Right.
music is often programmed alongside the music of Aaron Copland, of Leonard Bernstein, of John Williams. And so sometimes I've been asked to conduct all American programs where I get to conduct these great older American composers whose music I so admire, and also to do mine. And the other part of that answer, Scott, is that the recordings that I've done in London with the London Symphony Orchestra and the London Philharmonic Orchestra and the Philharmonia Orchestra, those have been very, very important to my career, and also fall in that kind of entrepreneurial category of making those recordings happen.
Extremely prestigious.
So I have conducted, all of those recordings. I've made 5 recordings in London over the years, and am now planning a 6th.
Another.
And so that's also, of course, an incredible experience, to go into Studio One at Abbey Road or Air Studios,
Fun.
Lyndhurst Hall, and to conduct these amazing London-based orchestras who are astonishing in their sight reading ability and the musicianship. So those recordings have become a very important part of my career because they've been embraced by classical radio, especially in America, but really all over the world. And now, Tiffany, you mentioned the internet and social media. It's really remarkable how social media has allowed us, in my case as a composer, to make connections so easily across the globe, and to hear from conductors in Europe and in Asia who are interested, who've heard the music somewhere. And then, of course, that again allows this idea of the ripple in the pond to spread, not just around the United States, but internationally. So all of those things, I think, have contributed to a growth in recent years.
So what is the process when you decide you want to compose something new?
A new orchestra.
Are you just sitting down to piano, creating that?
Does it start with a story?
Yeah. How does
Vision?
that?
So these are
Ellis Island is something we want to talk about. That's an amazing project. That when you explain that, you can understand how that came about. But when you're doing something new, is it just you're sitting down and going, okay, let's start here, or
we go at the beginning? So I mean, broadly speaking, so as a professional composer, I'm always thinking very carefully about my task at hand, what the commission is. And so when we use the word, commission in this sense, a commission is simply one is being hired to write a piece of music. So I'm commissioned by generally orchestras, but sometimes they might be choruses or orchestras with chorus. But broadly speaking, let's say it's orchestra. So there's going to be a specific occasion for which I'm being commissioned. We're going to write this piece for this occasion. There's going to be a specific length. This is going to be, let's say, a short piece of 5 or 6 minutes, or a longer piece, concerto of 18 minutes. Or in the case of Ellis Island, The Dream of America, that's a very big piece that's 45 minutes with actors and orchestra. So I'm always, first of all, looking at the specific context. What is it that I have to do? If I have to write a 20-minute piece, is that piece going to be in multiple movements or sections? What is the theme that's going to drive all of this? So and then we should also say, is there text or not? Because purely instrumental music, just the orchestra, where there's no singers, there's no spoken word, it's just purely music, then that's going to be a different kind of process than something that has either sung music by a solo singer or by a choir, or spoken word, in the case of Ellis Island, spoken by actors. Those are going to be different things from each other. But I think, Scott, what you're asking is, how does one actually start? And there comes a point where, okay, all of the planning and thinking has begun, but I have to actually sit down and get started. And just thinking of that blank canvas, so to speak, when you're using music notation software, it's the same idea. It's a blank screen. And so I've got, I have a template, and that template you can think of as like empty sheet music, if you will, that is across my screen from top to bottom and stretching out as far as I need it to be. And so I've got a template that has empty musical staves for all those instruments we talked about earlier: the woodwinds, the brass, the percussion, harp, strings, choir if we need it. And so at some point I've got to open up a new project, and I've got to say, okay, now it's time to start. And this is where it's very difficult to describe, because this is something about being a composer and having a certain ability. So if I am thinking I need a theme that represents nobility, or I need a musical theme that's going to suggest energy and optimism, then I have to sit down and, my hands are going to go to the keyboard and I'm going to start creating musical material. And it's very difficult to explain exactly how that begins, but those things that I just suggested, they're going to bring out in me something that's going to be a kind of musical response. So I'll just give you one example, just so it's kind of concrete.
So it's a feeling inside that's
yes,
kind
and
of
it has to
driving you
manifest
along.
itself by playing the keyboard and
Right.
coming up with material that I have a response to, that I say, this is good, or this is not so good, or of course, this sounds like something that I've heard before, because we don't want it to sound like Billy Joel or John Williams or
Right.
Aaron Copland. So, a big part of it is, okay, how do I create something new that lives within a tradition that comes from a place that I admire, but that is not merely an imitation of this other thing? And it's very difficult to explain how that happens, but there is a kind of trial and error process. And going back to that idea of the blank canvas or the blank staves that are in front of me, at some point I've just got to put some stuff down. And so play something, get something down, and either keep replaying it myself with my hands on the keyboard, or enter the notes and then have the software play it back to me, and I begin to make decisions about this.
Right.
Okay, this is good. Now let's see what we can do to expand this. And music is organized basically in bars, right? So a bar could be, let's say, just 4 seconds long. So I could write 4 bars of music, and that could be, let's say, 16 seconds of musical material. Well, I might even spend a whole day to get the ideal 16 seconds of musical material. But now I've created something that can be developed, that's something that can be grown, something that has potential to develop in a direction. And this is what composers do. And of course, all of that schooling that we talked about, and going to school for many years and saying, okay, let's learn counterpoint. Let's learn how musical lines behave against each other. Let's learn about harmony and how chords are developed. Let's learn about voice leading and how to make a line move forward. Let's learn about balance, going to your whole concept of design, and how we balance in an orchestration the woodwinds against the brass, against the percussion, against the strings, so that we have something where a melody can be heard over a bed of harmony below it. All of these things are the kinds of things that composers go to school for and spend many, many years trying to hone that craft. But the hardest thing really, and it's almost impossible to describe, is what some people would call a voice, a composer's voice.
I was just going to ask you your inspiration, which is probably that
yes,
voice.
And all of those things. I mean, if you think, for example, about Beethoven, if we go back to Beethoven, one of the most famous composers, I mean, Beethoven had a distinct voice and personality and sound, but it evolved very much over the course of his career. So early Beethoven and middle Beethoven and late Beethoven sound quite different, but he didn't start in a vacuum. He existed in a time period in which he had great composers who were alive when he was young. He had Mozart, he had Haydn, and he had others. So he built on those foundations, and then ultimately his own personality became manifest, and he became Beethoven. So all of us who are composers, we all do this. So when I sit down, as I described, and am trying to do this from nothing, it's never really from nothing, because I have all in my head, all of the music that I have loved in my whole life is all part of that process. And then I have my own kind of, whatever you want to call it, personality or voice or style. And that ultimately dictates the notes that I say, I like these notes better than I like these notes. And bar by bar, eventually we build this up. And when you can think about, okay, what does it take when at the end of the process, I have to have a 45-minute piece, and it has to have notes for an entire orchestra or orchestra plus actors or choir. I've got to have something that's going to have literally thousands of bars of music at the end that is idiomatic, that all of these people can play and do in such a way that it is gratifying to them as players or as singers, and that we create this final result. So it sounds almost insane, right?
It does. There's so many aspects to
it. But you must begin somewhere, and that somewhere, is just putting down that initial material. And, as you can probably tell just by hearing me talk about this, I'm very passionate about it, and also I'm very willing to work at it and work at it and work at it. And so, any of these pieces that we're talking about, I mean, Ellis Island took a year. It took a year to create. And, but here's a piece that did premiered in 2002. We're in 2025, and it's more more performed than ever. So that year that I spent between 2001 and 2002 writing it was a wonderful investment of a year, because now we've got something that really has a life that has gone on. And I never get bored with it. I never get tired. I never say, okay, I'm done with writing music. So I always want to keep going. And also there's also a learning process. I'm continually, hopefully, I'm a better orchestrator now than I was 20 years ago. We hope.
So when you're writing a new piece, and like you just spoke about going like Abbey Road, studio, and now you're going to record it, you've got a full orchestra in that recording studio. Is everything written? Is everything set for every instrument before you walk in? Or are you, as you're listening to it, adding or changing or?
In general, everything down to the smallest detail has been written. So there's in that kind of a context, there's not any kind of improvisation that's taking place. Now, if you had a certain kind of a piece, which is not really the kind of piece that I'm talking about, but if you had a certain kind of a piece and you had a soloist who had an ability to improvise, then there might be an improvisational aspect where the orchestra was written out totally, but maybe you had some empty bars for the soloist that they had to improvise in a certain style. But no, that's not what I do. And so, as an interesting example, we had talked a little bit before today about this piece called Rhapsody in Red, White, and Blue, which I wrote for the pianist Jeffrey Beagle. A long story, but a commission to honor and celebrate the centennial of George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, which had its centennial just over a year ago. In February of 2024 was the centennial. And this was an incredibly difficult commission because Jeffrey wanted a piece that would be able to stand on its own alongside and even be performed on the same concerts alongside George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, which of course is one of the most famous, most beloved and unique pieces of American music. It was a very, very challenging commission. I actually said no at first, and he kept pursuing me. He said, no, you're the right composer to do this. So going to your question, Scott, there are sections in that piece where the solo pianist, Jeffrey, who's a miraculous pianist, really wonderful pianist, there are sections where it sounds as if he is improvising some really cool stuff in a bluesy style. It sounds that way, but it's not. It has been notated absolutely precisely. So I have very carefully figured out exactly what to put down for Jeffrey so that he in fact sounds like he's improvising, but he's playing precisely what I notated. And then of course, when the orchestra comes in behind him, then that's been notated as well.
Where was that piece first played?
It was, interestingly, it was first played in Utah, in Park City, Utah, as it happened, was the Utah Symphony, June 30th of 2023. So less than 2 years ago. The stars aligned in such a way that the Utah Symphony had the premiere. It was opening night of the Utah Symphony's Summer Music Festival. And it was really a gorgeous setting, up in the mountains, outdoors, big screen so the audience could see, from far.
I know,
about
they do all those
3,000
festivals
people.
like that outside.
Yes, very, very, very beautiful, very memorable, very scenic, and literally we're just like among the mountains. And for a piece that has a middle section which really kind of evokes the big, wide open spaces of America and the beauty of America in its middle section, at least that's what I tried to do. It was really kind of a wonderfully poetic that's where we were for the premiere. And I mentioned that to the audience, and you really could feel it. It was a stunning experience, and especially that you're not in a concert hall, but you're actually outside and people are on blankets. And then when that piece was over, there was an immediate standing ovation for these 3,000 people. I'm standing on the stage, sort of looking out at the crowd and seeing all these people rise and stand because they were so moved by the experience. And Jeffrey and I were just, it had been like 3 years up to that moment. And so we soaked that moment in so dramatically and emotionally. And I have to say, largely because of Jeffrey's tenacity, his idea with that project was that he would play it in all 50 states, with orchestras in all 50 states. I thought that was an almost impossible task. But he is, in fact, in the process of doing that. And so far, he's already played the piece as of this week in 33 out of the 50
That's
states.
Amazing.
And that's
has it been played in Washington, D.C. at the the Gershwin Theater in the, what's it, Library of
Library of Congress. Yeah, it would be too big. It would be too big to fit in the Library of Congress because it would need a large orchestra. But no, not yet Washington, D.C. But as I say, 33 states thus far, and actually 47 performances because some of them are played at 2 or 3 times. And we do, in fact, have commitments from orchestras in all the remaining states. And in fact, there are a few states where, including Florida, where there's more than one orchestra that has already played it or will play it. So we have 56 orchestras involved. And, that's as far as Jeffrey and I both know, that's unprecedented in terms of a piece for a soloist and orchestra.
I know. What a great
piece.
Goal.
It's a great goal.
Have you done anything pertaining to like the Aspen Music Festival? Tiffany and I have enjoyed that. We actually, when you talk about the blankets and so forth, we prefer to be outside the building listening.
Sure, it's a wonderful experience. Yeah, so actually it's been pitched there, and I don't yet know if that will happen in Aspen. There is a small orchestra in Colorado that has agreed to perform it that hasn't performed it yet. And so some outdoors, mostly they've been in concert halls, and there's still about a dozen of those orchestras that have agreed to perform it that haven't scheduled it yet. So as I said, the premiere was June 30th of 2023, less than 2 years ago. There are performances scheduled for the next year, and probably it's going to be, I would say, early 2027 by the time Jeffrey gets to that last handful of states. So I think that by the time he's done, it will have been almost a 4-year process to play it in every one of the 50 states. But he actually is going to pull off that goal, and I have to tip my hat to him. That's amazing.
And does it feel different at each state? Like when each orchestra's playing the works, is there something different you take away each time you hear it, or?
There are certain similarities, and then differences just in the personality and the performance level of each orchestra. And I have to say,
and the acoustic of the place, right?
Yes, yes, for sure. And obviously indoors versus outdoors.
Outdoors, yeah.
One thing that was very sweet and very nice was just about 5-6 weeks ago. Of course, I'm from Rhode Island, as we said, and so the Rhode Island Philharmonic, which you might say is my hometown orchestra, the Rhode Island Philharmonic played it with Jeffrey as the soloist, a conductor named Aram Demirjian conducting it, and that was the first professional orchestra I ever heard when I was a teenager. So it was a really very kind of sweet moment to go back to Rhode Island, to be invited to go back and to talk to the audience right before the piece was played, and to say, hey, I'm from here. I was born 2 miles from here, and I went to Smithfield High School, and I went to Rhode Island College. And, to kind of get the shout outs from the Smithfield people and the Rhode Island College people. And then to have this magnificent pianist and this excellent orchestra play it in my hometown, the city of my birth. That felt very special in a way I think that's only possible because of that local connection.
So let's go back 1 minute to the
Ellis Island.
Ellis Island, the Dream of America, has had over 300 performances. Where was that commission, or where did the inspiration
originate from?
Yes.
So, and you're right.
And before you say anything, I just want to say, anyone who's listening and watching to this podcast, when you're done, you should go to, iTunes.
It's there.
And and download it and listen to it, because it's an incredible piece.
Thank you so much. And yes, you're right, Tiffany. It just had its 300th performance in Pittsburgh in January, which is really remarkable for a relatively recent American work and for a work of that scope. Only, to my knowledge, only about a handful of orchestral pieces written by American composers in the last 25 years can say that. And of that handful, Ellis Island is unique in that it's much longer. It's a 45-minute piece, and it's for actors and orchestra and projected images. So the idea for Ellis Island, one of the best ideas I guess I've ever had as a composer, actually hit me, I think, as far back as 1999. I was contemplating the poem, The New Colossus, which is the poem that is on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor.
Oh, wow.
And from which the lines, I think all of us who have grown up in the United States and have been students at some point were familiar at least with the closing lines. of this Emma Lazarus poem. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. And so those lines, I don't know how old I was when I first heard them. And so, let's say I was 10 years old or something like that. But so in my late 20s, I was contemplating this and contemplating early 20th century immigration. And I thought, what a fascinating idea this would be for a piece, to have stories from Ellis Island and to put them with orchestra. And I thought, this is such a good idea. Surely somebody must have done this. And I did some research, and as far as I could determine, no one had done that. And I thought, wow, I'm kind of surprised no one's done this. There had been some composers who had set to music, sung some of those stories as songs to be sung, but no one had done the idea that I had, which was to take these stories, create a script, and then put that with orchestra. So I began pursuing a commission so that I could, essentially be paid to write this piece and not just do it entirely on my own. And ultimately, the commission came from the Bushnell Center for the Performing Arts, which is the major performing arts institution in Hartford, Connecticut, where I had gone to graduate school. I was already living in California, so this was a few years before. But the Bushnell decided to commission the work in celebration of a new theater that they opened called the Belding Theater. And so it was a good time for the Bushnell to commission a piece. And I had this connection as having gone to grad school in Hartford. So they commissioned it and set a premiere with the Hartford Symphony Orchestra for April of 2002. And I was invited to conduct the premiere, which, looking back, was absolutely wonderful thing that I had the opportunity to conduct it, because so many conductors have done it. But I did have the opportunity to do the premiere. And so I set about that process. I went to Ellis Island a couple of times to do research in what's called the Ellis Island Oral History Project, which is a wonderful collection of about 1,000 interviews done between the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s, maybe even the early 2000s. But the Ellis Island Immigration Museum was opened in the 1990s. So as part of that process, there was an effort made to identify many Ellis Island immigrants who, of course, at that point were generally older, in their 70s or 80s or even 90s, but who had experiences to discuss that had happened decades before when they were very young. And so I examined personally over 100 of these stories from the Oral History Project. And ultimately, I decided on 7 stories, 4 women, 3 men, who came to America from 7 different countries in Europe and Russia between the years of 1910 and 1940. So there's a 30-year span that's represented in the piece and a large range of stories. And I set about creating the script, basically just using every word that you hear in the piece that is spoken by an actor or an actress is not invented by me. It was actually said by a real person in the course of an interview talking about their life. And I tried to find balance between the stories so that they would make a narrative and a flow. And I spent about 5 months creating the script. It's less than 10 pages. The script is less than 10 pages long. But that, of course, was the basis then for the whole piece. And then I spent about 5 months composing the entire score very carefully around those stories. So I wrote a 6-minute orchestral prologue that introduces the main themes of the piece, that sets the tone, that tells the audience what kind of a piece this is going to be, gives the musical material a theme for the immigrants themselves, a theme for the idea of traveling, etc. And then I very carefully essentially underscored those 7 stories so that the music is giving a kind of emotional counterpoint to what we're actually hearing. We're hearing words of real people, but then the music is bringing another level of engagement emotionally to this, and then wrote interludes that connect all of the stories. And ultimately, and this is very important, I knew that I wanted to set that whole poem by Emma Lazarus, The New Colossus, in its entirety. It's a sonnet. And so at the end of the piece, all 7 actors who are now familiar to us as listeners because we've heard their stories, they, one at a time, they take a line from the sonnet until they all join as a kind of immigrant chorus on the last line, I lift my lamp beside the golden door. And I knew that that was going to be the kind of emotional payoff of the whole piece. And so, it was a very I would say, inspired time. I was very inspired by the material, a very hard-working time. And at the end of the day, arrived at this piece that was premiered in April 2002, and has just never stopped being played since that day.
Well,
So
I think it's
pretty
I think it's
remarkable.
more relevant today for people to hear because of just what's going on with immigration and the fact that this country is coming upon its 250th anniversary.
Yes.
I mean, I think that as that celebration comes about, somehow your piece needs to be part of that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Back on Ellis Island.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. And of course,
With the golden light, over
yes,
it. I could
right.
see the whole tone.
And you're
Stage
right,
set.
Scott, that things have changed so much in this country just since the piece was written. I mean, since 2002, many orchestras that have presented the piece have made note of the fact that the whole situation has changed a great deal. And obviously, immigration has been and continues to be a very controversial topic. And it's interesting that, occasionally I've been asked, were you trying to make a political statement with this piece? And the answer is absolutely
No,
not.
no.
This is not. It's not a political piece. It's an historical piece.
It is. I feel it's
And-
full of pride too. There's just so
Yes,
much
and-
pride in understanding what it meant to come here.
And the difficulties and hardships that many people had to endure in
Yes.
order to actually come here and to settle. And as I was doing the research on the piece, I mean, these years ago, I was amazed to realize that there were over 12 million immigrants who came
Yep.
through Ellis Island to America over the years in which it was opened between 1892 and 1954. Over 12 million, and of course, as generations have gone by, that 12 million and their descendants has grown so dramatically. So, a significant portion of all living Americans can trace some ancestry through Ellis Island. So it has a very profound connection to our past. And I think those stories, I mean, obviously a big part of the reason why the piece has resonated so strongly with so many people is that they have found something of themselves in their own family stories in those stories that I chose. There's a kind of universality to it. And in our very contentious times in which we live, I think that the message of that piece is a message that is well worth hearing. Indeed.
Absolutely, yes.
I agree.
It really should. People should hear it. So, what's next creatively for you? Is there?
So, well, it's a great segue from the point you just made about the 250th anniversary or 250th birthday of the United States. So I actually have two major commissions for next year, for 2026. And one of them has just recently been announced, so I can actually talk about it, which is nice.
Oh, that's exciting.
And then the other has not yet been announced, so we'll just say there'll be another as well. But so I'm working on a pretty large piece. That's a musical visual piece. Its title is American Mosaic, and it will be about a 32-minute work for one single narrator and orchestra with rather incredible video. And my collaborator on this project is a man named Joe Sohm, S-O-H-M, who is quite renowned as one of the great Americana photographers. And I had met him years ago when we both were connected through the Boston Pops. And the Boston Pops did my piece that they commissioned way back in 2010 about the Kennedy brothers and the legacy of the Kennedy brothers that was done at Symphony Hall in Boston with Robert De Niro and Morgan Freeman and Ed Harris all narrating the words of the Kennedy brothers, which was amazing. And Joe Sohm had a piece called Visions of America, for which he had provided the photographs and the concept, and he was collaborating with the composer Roger Kellaway and the great lyricists Alan and Marilyn Bergman, who did so much stuff for Barbra Streisand and others. So they worked on this piece, Visions of America, and we found ourselves together briefly in Boston in 2010. And then about 2 years ago, Joe contacted me out of the blue with this marvelous idea for this project. And he said that after decades of going around the United States to, again, all 50 states, a kind of connection to the other project, and taking thousands and thousands of photographs that have been published, so many places, so many times, that he had been on a quest for the last 7 years to once again go around all 50 states in America, but to capture now high-def video, and that he was embracing the drone technology and the high-def video technology, and that he has been gathering this incredible collection of video that really has a sort of National Geographic feel to it. It's very expansive, very impressive, very beautiful. And over the course of more than 7 years, he's got something like 140 hours worth of video footage. Staggering. He's gotten every major city in America, the major national monuments, historical points of interest, and of course, many images of people. And so his idea was to create a piece together that would celebrate USA 250 using my music and his imagery. And even more specifically, he wanted to do what he called, and this is his term, Peter Boyer's greatest hits, which I thought was quite funny. And that he said, we should go back to your whole catalog and give me all your recordings, me, Joe, and let me start building these video sequences to all sort of these great segments from your pieces. And let's create our own mosaic and put this together. And so that is exactly what's happening. And I'm very happy to say that.
I love that collaboration component.
It's very exciting. It's a great idea on his part. And, he said to me that he believed that the combination of his catalog visually and my catalog musically would create something greater than the sum of its parts. And I think he's really right. There's a complementarity that goes together with these pieces that's very strong.
So has that been commissioned?
So it has been commissioned, and so I'm happy to say that we can announce the 4 orchestras that have jointly co-commissioned it thus far, and there may be more. So the lead commissioner is the Kennedy Center and the National Symphony Orchestra, and it will be premiered by the National Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Thomas Wilkins at the Kennedy Center, February 19th through 22nd of 2026. So those will be the first performances in Washington. Very excited about that.
And will you be there?
Absolutely. Yes.
I was going to say. Yeah.
Did you just recently put something out on social media about this?
I did.
I think I read it.
Yes. So this has been in the works for a long time, but it was finally just announced as part of the 2025-26 season of the National Symphony Orchestra. And I'm very proud that there are 5 American composers who've been commissioned by the National Symphony Orchestra to celebrate USA 250 next season. And I'm one of those 5. And this piece, American Mosaic, will be the first of those to be heard in February 2026.
What a project.
It's very exciting. And maybe you can come to Washington and see it. And so it's also been co-commissioned by, so far, 3 other orchestras. So the Cincinnati Pops that I've worked with quite extensively, they will perform the work at Cincinnati's Music Hall with John Morris Russell conducting. That's in March of 2026. And I'm very excited that they have actually secured Martin Sheen to narrate the piece in Cincinnati.
Oh my gosh.
So that's cool. Very exciting. And obviously I've admired Martin Sheen for my whole life. So pretty remarkable that he's agreed to narrate there. That was just announced within the last couple of weeks. And Pacific Symphony, which is in Orange County in Costa Mesa, which is the same concert hall in which Ellis Island was filmed for PBS, which is a Segerstrom Concert Hall. They have co-commissioned, and their new music director, Alexander Shelley, will be conducting in late May 2026. And then also the Williamsburg Symphony around historic Colonial Williamsburg. They have co-commissioned, and the piece will be performed in Colonial Williamsburg in early May.
It's such a cool place.
It's such a cool place.
Wow.
So when a piece is being commissioned by all these different places,
yes,
how are they finding you? Do you have an agent, a manager? How is that all being designed in terms of being put together or coming together?
I want to go to the one at the Kennedy Center.
You should definitely come. So actually, I mean, I have a publishing agent who handles my rentals of my catalogs, to answer your question about that, because there's so much of that going on, multiple pieces every month, and my publishing agent handles that. But in this case,
you call it rentals. I call it licensing.
It's the rentals of the orchestral music, and the licensing is actually done through BMI. So BMI, as the performing rights organization, all of these orchestras that play my music, of course, they have blanket licenses that allow them to play works by all composers at BMI, and the other one is ASCAP. But my publishing agent handles just the actual rental, so they can get the physical music to them and distribute it to the orchestra and play it, and then get it back to my rental agent. But in the case of this piece, I actually acted as my own agent in terms of promoting the project. So over the course of the last almost 2 years, I have approached many orchestras with this idea, but I'll say that I went to the Kennedy Center first because I thought this is a piece that is so appropriate to be premiered in Washington and and in the National Cultural Center, so to speak.
Right,
So the Kennedy Center and the National Symphony Orchestra, we had collaborated before. I wrote a piece called Balance of Power that they commissioned, and that was premiered in 2021. So it was a natural way to approach them. They said yes and said, we'll be what we call the lead commissioner. And then we created a plan to engage other orchestras. And so far, 3 others have come on board. And I will say that there are a half dozen other major orchestras who are also considering the project for the summer of 2026, because it will be the big USA 250 celebrations. So I'm hopeful that in the next couple months, that consortium of 4 may grow to, say, 6 or more. I'm pretty hopeful that will happen as well.
I would think so. I mean, with the 4th of July performances and that kind of thing, I feel like it goes right with fireworks.
Yeah. And actually, we have some wonderful imagery at the very end that Joe captured in 2 different years. He got amazing video shots of fireworks over Washington and over the Washington Monument. But also in the previous year, he got the same thing over the Arch in St. Louis, which is where he's from. So at the very end, we're going to have some very cool fireworks shots that sort of go from city to city. But it's an embarrassment of riches visually. And what's really so interesting about this project is essentially we're going to have a kind of a movie with narration, but the movie is being created to the score rather than the score being created to the movie. And I have an opportunity to very closely collaborate with Joe as we make all these decisions. And the pieces, it's very cool because it's in 11 sections that are 2.5 to 3 minutes each. And the narration is based around quotes from American history. And so our bookends at the beginning, at the end, are both from Benjamin Franklin. We have couple of great Ben Franklin quotes. And the first one is, he wrote in a letter in 1788, near the end of his life. He said, "I almost wish it had been my destiny to be born 2 or 3 centuries hence." And he talked about what the future of America might be. And that opens up the door to where we are, which is 250 years. And so anyway, great Ben Franklin quotes and some of the founding fathers and more recent quotes from American history. So each section has its own quote, its own context, and its own sort of visual design to it. And it comes from this incredible collection of imagery that Joe has. Some of these drone shots that he's gotten around America are really just breathtaking. And we know that when we put this with a full symphony orchestra, a big screen, and a narrator, I think we will have a very emotional experience.
I was going to say,
for the audience, I think.
I would think so.
Do you feel that the classical orchestral music is still growing in popularity?
Yes, although obviously it has evolved over the years. And I mean, what's so interesting is, orchestras in general, the audiences for orchestral music always have tended to skew older.
Correct.
And orchestras have always, at least that I am aware of, been seeking younger audiences, obviously, because they want to replenish and to grow the art form. And I mean, in recent years, I think a couple of things have happened that have allowed doors to open to the orchestra as a kind of delivery system for music that are really interesting. And both of them have to do with visual media, movies, and also video games. Now, I'm not a big video game guy. I mean, I was when I was young, but it's amazing how video games have become an avenue for orchestral composers, and big budget video games, of which there are many, have gotten lots and lots of big orchestra scores. Again, talking about recording at, Abbey Road and the great studios. So there are lots of younger people, as I am seeing it, that are getting introduced to the orchestra for the first time through that medium. And then those scores are performed in concert with a live orchestra. Now, we're not saying that we can draw a direct line from that to, the symphonies of Gustav Mahler, but what they have in common is that the orchestra is the kind of delivery system. And also, I think movies, full films played in concert, which of course is what used to happen way back in the silent era when orchestras were accompanying silent film. Now we're having this incredible resurgence of live music with with full orchestra behind it. And that has been facilitated partially through technology and through the means of synchronizing a live performance to film that technology has grown a lot and has become more
Right.
accessible. So we're seeing this all over the place. And interestingly, so many orchestras are, they're finding this is a great way to both to get new audiences and also, frankly, to sell out their concert halls. I mean, you do the Star Wars films in concert. People love the films. People love John Williams' score. And to see and hear it played live, I've gone to the Hollywood Bowl, for example, and you're seeing
Yep.
15,
That's so cool.
16,000 people who are sitting and watching E.T. with John Williams' score being
Wow.
performed live.
Wow.
There's this incredible communal experience that's it's different from just seeing a movie and hearing the orchestra on the soundtrack. It's different when it's actually happening live. So I think these things they're helping to introduce many new audiences to orchestras. And let's face it, this great music that goes back, to Bach, to Mozart, to Beethoven, to Haydn, that music was great and it is still great and it still exists. And there may be people who will have their interest piqued by movies and by video games and maybe will become more classical music aficionados. So I think
like that.
it's growing, but also it's changing as things do. Yeah.
Have you moved or done anything in the theatrical movie, feature film?
So one sort of segment of my career has been as an orchestrator, and as we were talking about earlier, that process of orchestrating from sketches. And so I have orchestrated, I have contributed orchestrations to a bunch of movies from some very well-known composers, including James Newton Howard and Thomas Newman and Michael Giacchino and Mark Isham. So it's interesting in those cases because I was not the composer of those scores. They were the composers and wrote wonderful music. And I was a sort of small contributor to the process. Did get myself some nice, screen credits, etc. But in terms of being engaged to actually compose music for a feature-length film, so this remains the kind of big elusive thing. And I feel that one of these days, director is going to invite and say, we want this kind of score. But for quite a few years, my work as an orchestrator, working on Hollywood movies as part of orchestration teams, was happening alongside my own concert composer work. And in the last several years, the concert composer work has really grown a lot, and the orchestration work has sort of withered away, partially, I think, because I've been focused so much on being a composer. So we'll have to see how those things may, perhaps rebalance in the future, or maybe just doing concert music is going to be the majority of what I'm doing. But that has grown so much that has really become, it's kind of a positive feedback loop. As I've gotten more work, I've also done more work, and it leads to more opportunities, et cetera, in that realm.
Well, we appreciate you spending time with us.
I know, so wonderful.
Love this conversation.
Me too. I feel like we could do a whole nother one. There's so many more questions.
Great to talk to you. And it's so nice to. Often I talk to people who we're all in the kind of classical music realm, and it's really interesting to talk to people who come from another realm and to know the kind of the kind of curiosity that people who are not doing this every day may bring to it. And ask the kinds of questions that show that curiosity, and hopefully I've been able to shed a little bit of light on what it is that orchestral composers do.
Well, I'm going to reach out to you
about
finding out where and when you're going to be doing another piece, but and also keep in the back of your mind, if you happen to be coming to Florida, you got to let us know.
Yes,
Put
absolutely, that would be great.
That would be wonderful.
Well, appreciate the time, and it was a great conversation. And
thank you very much. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you.
Hope to meet you in person again one of these days.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to another iDesign episode.
iDesign Labs podcast is an SW Group production in association with the 5-Star and TW Interiors. To learn more about iDesign Lab or TW Interiors, please visit twinteriors.com.